Berlin was burning above ground, but deep inside Hitler's bunker, Joseph Goebbels plotted his final chilling acts. What happened in those last 24 hours? If you value documented World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now back to the story. Outside, Berlin burned. Inside, a mind plotted its final acts. The city, once a vibrant seat of power, had become a desolate battlefield. Rubble and smoke curling into a sky streaked with fire. The Red Army advanced relentlessly, artillery shells shaking buildings and streets, leaving nothing untouched. In the bowels of the Führerbunker, Joseph Goebbels moved through dimly lit corridors, aware that the world he had known for years was collapsing in real time. The air was thick with tension, suffused with fear, despair, and the acrid smell of gunfire and destruction seeping from above. The audience immediately feels the weight of the siege. Sensing the claustrophobic atmosphere and the encroaching sense of doom, Goebbels' mindset was a complex mixture of unwavering ideology and the stark reality of defeat. He paced in small, confined rooms, occasionally stopping to confer with his aides or review maps of the crumbling city. Each glance at the distant artillery fire reminded him that time was fleeting, that every decision carried immediate and irreversible consequences. The bunker, once a symbol of strategic command, now felt like a cage. The audience is drawn into the psychological tension. The same corridors that had hosted confident planning now echo with uncertainty, anticipation, and dread. Outside, the sounds of the battle underscored the urgency. Civilians fled in panic, and the streets were filled with the disjointed chaos of retreating troops, collapsing structures, and fires consuming entire neighborhoods. Every floor of the bunker reverberated with the distant roar of tanks, the intermittent shelling, and the cries of the wounded. Goebbels listened, absorbed every detail, calculating, anticipating, yet powerless to reverse the course of events. The audience experiences immersive suspense, feeling both the physical and psychological proximity of danger. Conversations in the bunker were terse, deliberate, and charged with a mixture of fear and fanaticism. Loyal aides whispered instructions, shared updates, and attempted to maintain order. Yet the facade of control was fragile. Each report from the city above reminded Goebbels of the impending collapse, and each moment intensified the internal pressure to act decisively. Historical records, diaries, and witness accounts reveal the juxtaposition of a man holding onto ideology while facing inescapable reality, creating a morally complex portrait that captivates viewers' curiosity and moral reflection. As night fell over Berlin, the bunker became both a refuge and a trap. Goebbels' awareness of the Red Army's proximity sharpened every decision, every movement, every word. The tension was palpable, the stakes absolute. For the audience, this opening chapter establishes suspense, draws them into the psychological and physical landscape of Final Day Berlin, and sets the stage for exploring the personal and historical consequences of Goebbels' last hours. The city burned above, a constant reminder that history's endgame was unfolding, and the mind, plotting its final acts, was at the epicenter. With the fall of Berlin, every decision could seal a fate for millions. In the dim corridors of the Führerbunker, Joseph Goebbels confronted the stark reality of the Reich's collapse. The Red Army was closing in, and the once mighty machinery of Nazi power was reduced to smoke, rubble, and panic. For Goebbels, every choice now carried immediate, irreversible consequences, not only for himself but for his family, his loyal aides, and the ideological legacy he had fiercely defended. The audience is drawn into suspense, imagining the weight of each decision as the walls of the bunker pressed in with the inevitability of defeat. Goebbels weighed his options with meticulous attention, blending political calculation and personal conviction. Orders to remain loyal to Hitler's vision collided with the practical reality of imminent annihilation. His aides watched carefully, recording each movement, each whispered instruction, knowing that the final decisions of their leader would dictate survival or destruction. Decisions were not merely tactical, they were moral, profoundly shaping the lives of those around him. Viewers feel the tension as the narrative explores the delicate interplay of ideology, loyalty, and self-preservation under extreme duress. He considered the fate of his family with grim clarity. Protecting them, or ensuring their fate aligned with his vision of loyalty and honor, became a preoccupation that weighed alongside the broader collapse of Berlin. Diaries and witness testimonies suggest that Goebbels approached these decisions with a chilling detachment, yet there were moments of personal reflection and hesitation. Each calculated step highlighted the duality of a man bound by ideology, yet confronted by unalterable reality. The audience experiences suspense and moral curiosity. What choice will he make, and how will it define the final hours of his life and that of those closest to him? Interactions with his remaining aides further complicated these decisions. Some offered counsel, others deferred, yet all were acutely aware that every action might tip the balance between order and chaos. Orders were deliberated in hushed tones. Maps were scrutinized for escape routes or tactical positioning, though options were severely limited. Even minor choices, such as the allocation of resources or the timing of movements, carried life or death consequences. The audience is immersed in a psychological landscape, feeling the heavy responsibility and tension that framed each decision. As the final hours ticked away, Goebbels' choices crystallized the reality of the Reich's end. The corridors of the bunker echoed with whispered plans, ideological justifications, and the unspoken understanding of inevitable defeat. Every decision, whether regarding survival, loyalty, or legacy, was made under the unrelenting pressure of impending capture and the collapse of a once powerful regime. For viewers, this section heightened suspense, moral reflection, and curiosity, providing a visceral understanding of the psychological, ethical, and political dimensions that define Joseph Goebbels' last hours before history's final reckoning. For his children, the world outside had vanished. Inside, one man held final control. Joseph Goebbels moved through the dim corridors of the Führerbunker, acutely aware that the safety of his family rested in his hands, even as Berlin burned above. The cries of distant artillery and the chaos of collapsing streets reminded him and the audience that survival was fragile, fleeting, and dependent on meticulous decisions. Every movement, every whispered instruction to his aides, carried the weight of life and death. The stakes were intensely personal, yet intertwined with the ideological and historical collapse unfolding around him. Goebbels' interactions with his children were marked by careful control and constrained emotion. He observed them quietly, ensuring their presence in safe areas within the bunker, while simultaneously preparing for the final, irrevocable acts he believed necessary. The audience is drawn into the tension of anticipation. How does a man reconcile love, protection, and ideological conviction when faced with imminent defeat? Diaries and witness accounts suggest a paradoxical mixture of tender attention and cold, calculated planning, each gesture a reflection of both paternal concern and fanatical loyalty to Hitler's vision. Adults around him, family members and trusted aides, were both collaborators and witnesses. They assisted in maintaining routines, providing meals, or managing the children's safety, all while grappling with the psychological weight of knowing the regime's end was near. Goebbels' presence imposed both authority and fear, shaping the environment in which his children existed during those final hours. For viewers, the immersive suspense builds as they sense the conflict between human emotion and ideological rigor, fostering empathy and emotional engagement. Decisions regarding his children were not merely about immediate protection. They were intertwined with notions of legacy, honor, and ideological conformity. Goebbels believed that preserving his family's loyalty to the Nazi vision required absolute control over their fate. The narrative emphasizes moral and psychological tension. Viewers are confronted with the paradox of love expressed through extreme, morally complex decisions. Every action guiding, instructing, or isolating underscored the extraordinary pressures placed on individuals in the collapsing world of the Third Reich. As the Red Army encroached, every moment in the bunker became critical. Goebbels' deliberations, whether about moving family members, securing private spaces, or preparing for irreversible acts, were executed with meticulous attention. For the audience, the suspense is relentless. The intimate, human dimension of these decisions contrasts sharply with the vast external chaos of Berlin's fall. The section evokes empathy, moral reflection, and historical curiosity, allowing viewers to engage with the psychological and emotional landscape of a father navigating fear, ideology, and the inexorable approach of history's final reckoning. Even in the shadow of defeat, loyalty demanded obedience. Inside the Führerbunker, Joseph Goebbels convened with his most trusted aides, the corridors alive with the low hum of whispered strategies and ideological reinforcement. The Red Army's artillery fire shook the city above. And yet, within these dimly lit halls, plans, discussions, and decisions persisted. Goebbels' aides were acutely aware that their presence carried weight, not only for logistical tasks but for the psychological reinforcement of their leaders' convictions. Every suggestion, every report, was measured against the ticking clock of Berlin's imminent collapse, heightening suspense for viewers as they sensed the precarious balance between loyalty and fear. The discussions were a blend of political strategy, moral rationalization, and practical planning. Goebbels relied on these confidants to execute final arrangements, secure communication lines, and maintain control over the few remaining elements of the Nazi hierarchy. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. The aides were caught between personal survival, ethical awareness, and devotion to a regime whose collapse was undeniable. The audience experiences this tension through detailed narrative imagery, each gesture, glance, and word carrying layers of meaning and risk. Orders were given with precision, and tasks delegated with unspoken urgency. Some aides were assigned to manage communications with distant loyalists, others to oversee supplies, while a few monitored security within the bunker itself. Every instruction was executed under the pressure of imminent defeat, and any hesitation could provoke suspicion, punishment, or loss of life. The suspense is palpable. Viewers imagine the stakes, empathizing with the psychological strain and moral compromises of those navigating loyalty. Under extreme duress, interpersonal dynamics further intensified the psychological landscape. Trust was both vital and fragile. Aides had to balance obedience with the knowledge that history would judge their choices. Conversations often drifted into ideological reinforcement, with Goebbels reminding his confidants of the principles that had driven the Nazi movement, even as the city crumbled. These moments offered insight into the fusion of fanaticism and strategy, inviting viewers to contemplate the intricate interplay of belief, fear, and human survival instincts. As the bunker's final hours approached, Goebbels' planning became increasingly personal and deliberate. Decisions regarding movement, communication, and the safety of immediate personnel reflected both the collapse of the wider Reich and the intimate realities of confined space under siege. Each action highlighted the psychological pressure on both the leader and his aides. The audience is immersed in the tension, understanding that obedience here was not merely hierarchical, it was survival. Ideology and moral complicity intertwined. Through these interactions, the narrative captures the complex human psychology of those at the epicenter of a crumbling regime. The suspense, ideological intensity, and moral ambiguity engage viewers deeply, offering insight into the final moments of loyalty, planning, and survival within Hitler's inner circle. The audience is left contemplating the delicate balance of power, faith, and fear, creating a compelling bridge to the final chapter of Goebbels' last hours. In the last hour, all illusions faded, leaving only stark reality. Joseph Goebbels moved deliberately through the Führerbunker, aware that Berlin, once the heart of his power, was collapsing into smoke, fire, and ruin. The distant thunder of artillery and the sporadic echo of small arms fire were constant reminders that time had run out. Each corridor he passed, every guarded doorway, and even the confined spaces of the bunker itself carried the weight of history closing in. The audience is immediately immersed in suspense, feeling the claustrophobic tension of a city under siege and a man confronting the finality of his choices. Goebbels' reflections were a complex interplay of ideology, despair, and self-preservation. He revisited the principles that had guided him, recalling speeches, propaganda efforts, and the vision he had so fervently upheld. Yet even in these final moments, he faced the undeniable reality. The regime he had served was extinguished, its structures dismantled, and its leaders either dead or captured. The psychological tension is palpable as the audience contemplates the cognitive dissonance of a man still clinging to ideology, while witnessing its total collapse. Every movement was calculated. Goebbels reviewed the arrangements he had made for his family and close aides, ensuring that final instructions were carried out with precision. Each decision, from the allocation of personnel to the handling of sensitive documents, reflected both a desire for control and an awareness of the impending consequences. The audience feels the suspense in these seemingly small acts, even in the shadow of defeat. Every choice had profound implications for life, death, and historical record. Outside the bunker, Berlin was a landscape of devastation. Civilians fled, buildings burned, and the Red Army pressed inexorably forward. Goebbels observed the city's destruction with a mixture of detachment and calculation, recognizing both the literal and symbolic collapse of the Reich. The juxtaposition of his internal reflections and the external chaos amplifies tension for viewers, providing an immersive understanding of the psychological state of someone at the epicenter of historical annihilation. As the hour waned, Goebbels prepared for the final acts that would define his legacy. The narrative draws viewers through his measured steps, reflective pauses, and brief interactions with aides and family. Each gesture arranging documents, giving instructions, or speaking quietly to confidants reveals the meticulous planning and psychological complexity behind his actions. The audience is simultaneously engaged with suspense, moral ambiguity, and historical intrigue, anticipating the imminent conclusion of both personal and ideological narratives. Through these final movements and reflections, the story of Goebbels' farewell to Berlin captures the intensity of a regime's collapse, the psychological burden of ideological adherence, and the stark reality of historical judgment. Viewers are left in suspense, emotionally engaged, and intellectually absorbed, contemplating the interplay of power, morality, and personal responsibility in the last hours of one of history's most infamous figures. History would remember the final moments, stark and unflinching, as Joseph Goebbels faced the conclusion of his life and legacy. Within the confined, dimly lit corridors of the Führerbunker, the weight of defeat pressed on every action. Outside, Berlin was engulfed in fire and rubble, the Red Army advancing relentlessly, reducing the city to chaos. Goebbels' movements were deliberate, precise, and steeped in the grim knowledge that the choices of these last hours would define the final chapter of his existence. The audience is immediately drawn into suspense, aware that the culmination of ideology, power, and personal conviction is about to collide with the harshest reality. Goebbels' final acts were calculated to control both the practical and symbolic outcomes. Diaries, testimonies, and historical documents reveal a man meticulously arranging the fate of his family and immediate circle while orchestrating his own end. Each gesture, from securing private spaces to issuing final instructions, demonstrated the fusion of ideological devotion and personal determination. The psychological tension was immense as he balanced the desire to maintain authority with the acceptance of inevitable defeat. Viewers experienced the suspense and moral ambiguity, reflecting on the human capacity for both loyalty and self-determination, even in the shadow of annihilation. The immediate consequences of these decisions unfolded swiftly. Goebbels carried out measures intended to secure his family's fate alongside his own. The actions carried out with chilling efficiency. Historical records describe the methods employed and the locations chosen, preserving a factual account of these final moments. The audience is drawn into a careful interplay of emotion and historical precision. They witness the calculated measures, the irreversible outcomes, and the tangible impact on those involved. Each element heightens curiosity and engagement, connecting viewers intimately with the narrative of the Reich's collapse. Contemporary documentation, photographs, witness statements, and archival reports provides corroboration of the events, ensuring that history would neither forget nor obscure the reality of Goebbels' final acts. The narrative reveals both the meticulous planning and the tragic inevitability, allowing viewers to contemplate the moral and human dimensions of these decisions. The audience is prompted to reflect on the consequences of fanaticism, loyalty, and the human instinct to exert control even when all external structures have crumbled. In the final moments, the convergence of ideology, personal choice, and historical consequence reached its apex. Goebbels' death marked not only the literal end of an individual but also symbolized the closure of an era dominated by destructive fanaticism. For viewers, this section provides resolution while fostering moral reflection, historical awareness, and emotional engagement. The narrative ensures that the audience comprehends the weight of choices made under extreme circumstances, leaving a lasting impression about the interplay of power, conscience, and historical legacy.